Okay, now we're talking about competitions in markets. So to frame this class module, I started with this question and really wanted to provide kind of my perspective on kind of what this looks like. And ultimately, from my perspective, this is about branding. And so I'm going to share a little bit that a colleague and I, a bit of a presentation that a colleague and I presented at the NASPA conference a few years ago. And so we looked at branding and kind of thought about it from, what is the role of branding? And branding serves as a means for institutions to differentiate themselves from competitors in the marketplace. It represents efforts to influence consumer choices, and ultimately, in higher education, the organization or the institution itself becomes a brand. But we can also think about branding at a smaller level, not just as entire institutions, but as the various entities or the various instructional support systems within an institution. So when talking about brand, one of the perspectives is that we're actually talking about brand personality. And some research that's been done on branding, and this is not specific to higher education, this actually comes out of the business psychology literature, is that a brand is a set of human characteristics that become associated with a particular organization or company. But again, that organization and the brand become one. Brands serve a symbolic purpose. Um, Oftentimes when we think about brands, we think about them in terms of a visual representation. We see the swoosh and we automatically associate that with Nike. We see a blue oval and we associate that with Ford. We see a bow tie emblem and that's Chevrolet. So, but it's not just visual symbols, it's also the ability that a brand, when it's well defined, we hear, or we might hear a name of an institution or a company, and we're able to associate particular uh, feelings or values or characteristics with that. And that comes out of the fact that over time, a brand builds trust. Individuals feel a relationship and a kinship with a brand, and that comes out of the brand conveying a message. And again, it evokes an emotional response. So think about in your own lives, do you experience or express brand loyalty? I'll give some examples from my own experiences. Uh, for for some time, I was very loyal to the Sony brand when it came to electronics. That's because I had very positive experiences. I had friends who'd had positive experiences and stuck with them. But then what happens? Something happens to make us switch from one brand to another. Either we perceive a better value, or maybe something happens and we perceive that there's something wrong with the brand and our trust is shaken. And there are plenty of examples of that happening in business. Think about companies that end up going out of business, not because of changes in industry, but because of uh, having shaky consumer trust. And ultimately, a brand should communicate what the institution values and what it believes to be true. So I'm not going to go through this table. Like other points in the course, these slides are posted on Canvas for you to go through if you want to take notes separately or take notes of your own thoughts, either as you watch the video or at some other time. But just to demonstrate that there are some different elements that come into play when associating brand personality with an institution. And so my colleague and I set out to examine the perspective of these particular sets of these elements of brand personality from co-curricular engagement and prestige building in this project. So we called it Selling Student Affairs, and we were curious based on how institutions present themselves on their websites. How do those institutions use various amenities or programs that we often associate with student affairs as a means of recruiting new students? And so our project was looking at the top 50 national universities based on the U.S. News and World Report rankings, and we visited the websites of these institutions. So we would start at the main landing page. So, for example, harvard.edu. So the main page, what's there? Are there elements of new student recruitment that are on that page? Or even if it's not explicitly aimed at recruitment, are there things on that page that communicate the brand of Harvard, and then also that are utilized, or that we can discern being utilized to be appealing, to make the institution appealing? And then from there, we also looked at the specific undergraduate admission pages. And in both of those instances, what are the images and language being used? How do they communicate the brand? And to what extent are student affairs functions featured? So as we went through this project, we found some themes that were most consistent. Institutions, this group of 50 institutions, use student diversity, the aspect of fun, and then the appeal of living on campus as their means of leveraging their brand, but then leveraging their brand through these student affairs functions as a means of attracting students. So for one example, we looked at Columbia University, and on their homepage, they had quite a bit about life on campus. And one of those aspects was devoted to diversity. And so this is just one example of communicating the importance of diversity, just how diverse their student body is. That through that diversity, you can have fun through organized activities and campus organizations, and that living on campus is a wonderful experience, partly because of the diversity of student life. And then we looked at, and then one of the things that we saw as one example from Illinois is they kind of rolled everything together. So when we clicked on the campus life feature, and so this was all part of their enrollment management page, or their page geared toward student recruitment. You can see that there's this bar here of different points of information. So start planning for college early. What's the academic life of the institution? What's the campus life? And under campus life, everything about the brand personality came through. And so it's not just about the brand personality. I mean, they leveraged everything they could from athletics, student organizations, diverse students and events, and really tried to weave all that together as part of their brand to attract new students to the institution. And this is more from the Illinois webpage. As another example, what images are they using? So they're using something here of an image of a campus event to show just how fun the campus is. So kind of an example, using the Illinois example, okay, they're using that the campus is exciting and fun. They showed outdoor experiences, they showed athletics, they talked about the importance of community. As we clicked through the Illinois website, and this is something I didn't show on the screen, but when we were conducting the research, they talked about their rankings. They played up the history and tradition, not just through athletics, but through other aspects. Um, they talked about innovation in their programs and the success of their students and their alumni. So, what is it about market-based thinking that fits with higher education? And it's something that we've talked about previously in this course, and that it's about accountability. Okay, maybe that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but we'll see if it comes together. So think about the perspective that if you read the newspaper or read, and I don't advocate this, but if you read the comments on news stories online, I tend to avoid the comment sections because it brings out the worst in people on the interwebs. There's something wrong with higher education. And so branding efforts in some ways are an effort, reflect efforts to try to diminish some of that negative perception. And so those perceptions that we're a bunch of elitists, that not everybody needs to go to college, and I'm not advocating that everybody needs to go to college. I just advocate that everybody needs to have the opportunity to make that choice for themselves. And so people ask, obviously, okay, those questions, but also, are we providing a good value for the money? Are we good stewards of our resources? And are students graduating with what they actually need to make them employable in today's economy? And so the market environment that we have is not just about leveraging our own brand personality, but it's also we're also being driven as institutions and entities within institutions to respond to these questions and other questions that are being asked of higher education today. And so one of the things that we're seeing is that competition is, and the metrics of competition are being defined for institutions in some states. And so we're seeing this coming forward in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and with the performance-based funding being worked into the biennial budget from Governor Bevin. And it's not like it's a new thing. Performance-based funding has been going on for a while in different states. It's come and gone in some states. It's come back in other states. But it's a way to figure out, in some ways, what exactly are the measuring sticks. And so one of the things that we look at in higher education is the idea of high impact practices. And I provide a perspective of high impact practices in another part of this course. But think about how we might use high impact practices both to leverage the institutional brand, but also to serve as metrics for organizational performance and institutional performance. Now, this all sounds great, but there are certainly downsides when it comes to branding and market-based efforts and decisions. One potential downside is that because we're set in or being pushed into an environment of increasing competition, are there some institutions who are losing sight of their mission? So there was an article recently in the Chronicle of Higher Education, and if I can get the full text, I'm going to have it on Canvas. So if you see it on Canvas, that means I was able to get full text. If you don't, then you just have to trust me that this article is out there. But it's one that I was able to read full text, but I knew it's going away soon. So I actually read it right before starting to record this video. So we're seeing some downsides. And those downsides, again, institutions there's the potential some institutions are veering from their missions because of the heightened competition. And this particular Chronicle article, the author of it was looking at regional institutions and asking the question if there's some regionals that have, because of competition, have augmented or or change their missions to try to look more like research universities uh, rather than the comprehensive regional campuses that they are intended to be. And of course, rankings have pros and cons. The pros are that it increases visibility for those institutions that are ranked. It provides opportunities to be recognized for things that are done well. But then the con is that there's a very limited perspective of those things that are done well. Not everything can be boiled down to an algorithm that can be plugged in to figure out the rankings. Another con with rankings is that when it comes to the rankings for individual academic program areas, particularly those at the graduate level, um, it's a little bit different process than what's used to rank institutions. So, for example, when I was at Louisiana State University, we would receive a survey every year, and it's not even fair to call it a survey. We were asked to provide our perspective on what are the top 10 higher education graduate programs in the country. And so in rank order, we would put down who we perceive to be the top 10 programs. Oh, that's definitely flawed. Because every year I would put LSU on that list to try to, uh, on some chance that maybe other people thought that LSU was showing promise and were putting us in that list as well. Because as you go up in rankings, there are greater opportunities for more resources, and so there's a little bit of self-serving interest that goes on in that type of procedure, and so there's, as I said, there's a little bit of a flaw in how those rankings come to be. And then finally, one of the cons that comes about is not just with rankings, but with thinking in terms of an institution's place in a market is the question of whether or not a market orientation is at odds with pursuing what could be labeled as a true educational philosophy. From one perspective, we want students to come to college to learn. And one of the outcomes of a college education is not necessarily the content that is learned, but that the student, the individual, learns how to learn. Well, that's actually somewhat difficult to measure, and it's difficult to convey that. And so what we end up with is, and this isn't, in an ideal world, yes, everybody would come to college for the pursuit of learning. The reality is that's probably not been the case ever in the history of American higher education for 99.99% of the people who have attended college. Most people go to college to get a degree to get a better job, and that's the reality. But along the way, we want to make sure that people are learning and developing, and that we're putting pieces into place to help facilitate that learning and growth. And that if we think about higher education in a market mindset, there's the chance that we slip down this slope where we see higher education as a commodity. And I think it was sometime in 2015, there was an article that got a lot of circulation about that very topic of higher education and a commodity. And our own President Davies came out against that mindset, that higher education is not a commodity, that this is an experience, that we are not producing products, but we are helping students learn and also learn how to learn.